There's something weird about being awake when the rest of the world around you is fast asleep. As somebody with ADHD, I've often had nights where my brain refuses to go to sleep, and then I'm just up till God knows when, but I can't message anybody to chit chat because, well, most of them are out like a light. Well, mine is my non-biological older brother. He's easily the most nocturnal person I know, often going to sleep when I'm waking up for the day. But he's also part vampire, so it makes sense. Question for you. What's the weirdest thing you've seen at night? Let me know in the comments, and let's dive into some horror stories together, folks. Alrighty, I'm gonna start off today with a tale from somebody who worked in a prison, since that seems like a hotbed for chaos. And by that, I mean if something stood out in that environment, it's probably worth talking about. When Charles Staub was new to his position, he was working overtime one night in a housing unit that had seen quite a lot of deaths, which is unfortunate. It was well after midnight and all of the offenders were supposed to be in their cells. Since this was a medium security prison, the offenders still had access to leave their cell to use the communal bathroom at night. The time was thankfully not 3 a.m., just 2 a.m., and our lovely friend was making his rounds to count the prisoners. He watched an offender walk down the stairs from the second level and into the bathroom. So he stood at the entrance to the bathroom and yelled in to ask them what cell they were in so he can add an extra body to that cell for his count, but didn't get an answer. He then walked into the bathroom and searched everywhere but found nobody. Charles left the bathroom, walked up and down the halls in the area, counted everybody in the cells, and none were missing, which left him completely puzzled. Eventually he returned to his base and told one of his coworkers about what happened, and the first thing they asked was if the unknown man was tall and skinny with long locks, and yes, he had been. So when Charles answered in the affirmative, he was told, "Oh, that's Mr. Bones. He took his own life a few years ago, but he's still hanging around." The nonchalant tone of that statement shocked Charles right there and then, and it's been in the back of his brain ever since. I suppose I should be scared, but my heart goes out to the poor soul who can't move on from a place nobody wants to be in long term. Seriously, I hope he moves on. Next up, we have a tale that reminds me of one of my favorite musicals, The Phantom of the Opera. Yes, I'm very aware that I'm a basic emo musical theater girly. Dante McMillan used to be the sole night custodian of an old Catholic church, and take it from me, those places get pretty dang creepy when there's no one around. Personally speaking, I was an altar server when I was younger, and the room with all the habits was in a tiny basement area underneath the main chapel area, and off that room was another dark, even lower basement area that nobody ventured near. Even just thinking about that gives me the heebie-jeebies. Alright, back to Dante's tale before I get flashbacks. There was a piano upstairs in the attic storage area, which he thought was just broken because of where it was being stored, so he didn't pay too much attention to it, other than occasionally dusting off the top of it. One night, Dante started hearing piano music from the attic, and immediately assumed somebody was up there pranking him. So he went up, and there was nobody around. He checked everywhere that a body could be hiding, but zilch. And then when he turned around to walk away, he heard a loud bang behind a metal door that was locked and he had no access to. He also had no clue where the door led to. When he asked the former night shift custodian, she confirmed that she had also experienced the weird music and had no idea what the door was for. Yeah, Dante never worked a night shift ever again after that night, and I don't blame him. Alright, this is one story I didn't need to Google for today. Didn't need to research anything. This is something that happened to me back when I was in high school. So I worked some night shifts over a couple of different places. At a grocery store, but most importantly, a haunted house. This haunted house was taking place in an old Art Deco movie theater that was out of use at the time, but I'm happy to report that it's back up and running now. So picture this. The year is 2014, and I'm about to play a version of the Annabelle doll in a small town haunted house. It's my first time being a scare actor. This is like the first year I've ever heard of Ed and Lorraine Warren. What's a girl to do but to bring in every possible prop she can? I did a lot of community theater, so I always brought in everything. I had my cursed ballerina rag doll, my porcelain dolls that sat in rocking chairs, and a music box that slowly played the Winnie the Pooh theme song. And the room was overall empty other than myself and a doll box that was essentially just a cardboard fridge box with a front cutout that I used to stash, blankets in to keep warm with because it got cold. I had everything set up just so. And after the second night of this event, I came back the next day to everything in my room moved around. All the dolls were in the wrong places, and seeing as I'm a bit of a perfectionist, I was ticked. I questioned every annoying boy in the cast, and when none of them fessed up, I was like, okay, we're gonna test this. So when I left that night, I put a strand of my hair on the door and a piece of tape on a part where the paint was peeling so I would know if it had been moved. I was like, this is foolproof. But the next day, when I walked in after a day of work at my other job, the tape hadn't been moved, the hair hadn't been moved, but the dolls were all moved again. This happened pretty often for the rest of the run, and for the most part, I got used to the poltergeist spirit. Kind of annoying, but it's like, okay, it's like that weird older brother. But then Halloween night comes. Little context on me, folks, I'm from a town where more often than not, it snows on Halloween night. It's pretty dang cold up there. So on that fateful night, since it was a building without heat, there was a heavy-duty space heater placed in my room to try and keep me from freezing in my little white t-shirt dress. No matter where we put it or how close I got to it, and I was almost hugging this thing, the room was ice cold all night. And I couldn't get warm until I left the room at the end of the night. I remember going out into the lobby of the theater and just being like all bundled up in blankets. I returned to the haunted house the next year, and once again, Halloween night, the room was ice cold. To this day, I don't know the nature of that specific ghost of the LaSalle Theater. I know there's a couple of other ones. It's an old place. What can I say? This next tale takes place when long-term nurse Jenny was placed in charge of caring for an elderly woman with no family who was admitted to the hospital when her husband passed away. She didn't speak often, but when she did, it was usually just words that made no sense together. Jenny felt bad for her because ever since she had arrived, so many of the residents in her area that she seemed to enjoy spending time with had also passed. She put up a picture of each of them next to her pictures of her husband, and several others who were probably just family, to remember them. Being an extremely empathetic person, Jenny felt sorry for this woman, and strived to give her extra attention whenever she could, and formed a bond with the lady. It just seemed so unfair that she had such luck and kept losing people that she cared about. One day she looked at Jenny and said plain as day, "Sweetie, I think I'm done now," and handed Jenny a picture. Now it was a picture of Jenny, and she smiled because it touched her heart that she was that important to the old woman. But I understand, I do some jobs where I've received Christmas cards of pictures of myself in them, and they're on my fridge. So this old lady passed nearly a week later, and poor Jenny cried for days from the loss. The old lady knew it was the end, and she said goodbye as best as she could. So fast forward, it's under 2 years later, when Jenny was chatting with a colleague and that old lady came up in conversation. Her colleague referred to that lady as the crazy, explicit word for a female dog in heat, which seemed very out of character for her, and it shocked and offended Jenny deeply. She expressed this to her colleague, not so nicely, and the lady looked at Jenny with a shocked look and was like, "Oh dear, do you not know?" And then proceeded to explain something to Jenny that she really didn't know. As it turned out, it came out sometime after she had passed that the old lady had killed her husband by poisoning him, and that there was an investigation because it appeared that she had a ritual of befriending somebody, obtaining a picture of them, and hiding the picture until she could kill them, usually by poisoning and then displaying the picture as a sort of trophy. It was suspected that this may have been the reason for the spike in the mortality rate during her stay and the considerable number of photos in her collection. The last Jenny heard, the old family photos weren't any relation to the old woman, and the police were trying to ID the individuals and compare them to several cold cases. Sheesh. Thank goodness Jenny survived to tell the tale. Security guard Mason claims that while he wants his location to stay anonymous, he used to work overnight security in one of the largest, best, and oldest hospitals in the US. He and his fellow security officers all have stories about one building in particular, which was built in the late 1800s and was the original psychiatric building for said hospital. Now, being the late 1800s, not much was truly known about psychiatric disorders at the time. On top of that, this hospital was known for its medical research. And sadly, with all that we know about history, when you combine the two, that spells out a lot of nightmares. A couple years before Mason started working security there, this building in particular had been converted into offices after the newly built part of the hospital dedicated a section for an updated psych ward. So Mason's rounds for the first night of our tale happened to include the building. At night, this building was empty, since most of the staff who worked in those offices left by 5 p.m. every day. A lot of folks apparently liked to rush home, which is fair, but they would leave their office doors unlocked, which was a big no-no due to medical information being located in said offices. So it was part of security's job to go to each floor, make sure every door was locked, and if it wasn't, secure it themselves. Please. Mason did his initial sweep of the building to make sure it was clear of people, and then proceeded to do door checks. The hallways were pretty narrow, so he could check both sides of the hallway's doors at once, and at the end of this hallway there were 2 sets of doors he had to go through to reach the final office, which was a dead end. Everything was secure, so he was like, okay, time to move to the next floor. He exited the 2 sets of doors from the dead end office and froze at what he saw. Every door he had just checked was ajar, and set so perfectly so that their own weight wouldn't cause them to shut again. A single wheelchair had appeared at the end of the hallway and was facing towards the steps. Now Mason had heard other security officers outright reject that set of rounds due to strange stuff happening there, but he originally laughed it off until, well, he saw what he saw. He went around and forced the now open door shut and tried to shrug it off. Nothing else weird happened that night, and he returned the next night to patrol the miners' ward. The area was under construction, so security was needed just to make sure nobody got hurt by accident, because safety first. When Mason was hanging out in the break room before his shift officially started, other security guards were discussing various reports of seeing a young boy with brown hair who would disappear randomly, and Mason dismissed this as just gossip meant to spook off the newbies. An hour into making his rounds, a foreman who had stayed late called security and asked for an officer to come up because, well, a youngin' with brown hair locked himself in a room and he didn't want him to get hurt with all the open wires in there. Mason answered the call, went and unlocked the door for the foreman, and looked in this 20 by 8 room for about 10 minutes, and when he saw nobody, called it in as a false alarm. He attempted to shrug it off until he received a call for backup in the psych ward. When he arrived, he noticed a patient in a near state of panic near the remnants of a shattered chandelier. To quote Mason, before he experienced the abnormal happenings in the building, he would have written off his testimony as idiocy. But the patient claimed that something held him in that spot as the chandelier started swinging wildly until it began to fall. When it started to fall, he was let go and allowed to move, and scrambled out of the way before it hit him. Now this was the beginning of the end for Mason, who requested to be transferred to hospitals the next day. Now, as much as I love the Phantom of the Opera, I don't want it to become reality. One of my favorite things to say in accordance with that is that I love one fictional toxic tenor, and only one. emphasis on fictional. And that brings us to the end of our time. I've been Alexa, your resident ookie spooky girly, and if you enjoyed my ramblings today, could you help us out by giving this video a like, subscribing if you aren't already, hit the bell for more scary stories from us here at Top 5 Scary Videos, and I'll see y'all next time, you lovely spooky people.